When Keanu Reeves stepped onto the stage of the Melissa Carter show, the audience clapped politely, expecting a gentle, thoughtful conversation, something safe. After all, that's what Keanu represented to the world: kindness wrapped in mystery, the beloved gentleman of Hollywood. But behind the stage curtain, something far more calculated was brewing. Melissa Carter wasn't here for conversation. She was here for war. Producers buzzed like bees behind the glass. Every camera angle was engineered, every lighting cue rehearsed. The audience had been hand-picked, not for adoration but for division. A split of adoring fans and skeptics who were instructed when to clap, when to pause, and when to pounce. This wasn't an interview, it was a takedown. And as Keanu calmly took his seat, face unreadable, Melissa leaned forward in her chair, flashing a smile designed to deceive. She had one mission: to flip the script on Hollywood's nicest guy. She thought she had him cornered. But what she didn't know, Keanu had already seen the trap. It all began 2 weeks earlier, a cold Tuesday morning. Keanu sat at his kitchen counter in the Hollywood Hills, barefoot, black coffee in hand, scanning emails on his laptop. Film offers, charity invites, fan letters. And then, one subject line caught his eye: exclusive invitation, a candid conversation with Melissa Carter. He paused. Melissa Carter, the queen of calculated television. The woman whose interviews had ended careers and birthed internet controversies overnight. Keanu wasn't stupid, he knew what this was. A setup, a spectacle. Still, he sipped his coffee, thought for a moment, and calmly typed, "I'd be honored." Meanwhile, at the studio, Melissa's team was preparing the battlefield. Producers scribbled strategy on whiteboards, camera blocking, narrative flow, psychological pacing. Melissa stood at the head of the room, flipping through cue cards. "He's an easy target," she muttered. Her lead producer Jake raised an eyebrow. "Keanu Reeves? You sure?" She rolled her eyes. "Exactly, the world sees him as a saint, untouchable. But that's the weak spot. We paint him as out of touch, a relic, outdated masculinity in a modern world." Jake nodded slowly. "And if he pushes back?" Melissa smirked. "That's our viral clip." Fast forward. The day of the interview arrived. Keanu pulled into the studio parking lot on his sleek black motorcycle. He removed his helmet, hair slightly tousled, dressed in his usual style: black blazer, gray t-shirt, fitted jeans, calm, collected, like a man who'd walked through fire and still found peace on the other side. Security nodded. "Big fan, Mr. Reeves." Keanu smiled. "Thanks, man." Inside, the stage buzzed with energy. Cameramen tweaked their lenses, producers whispered into headsets. Every row of the audience was staged, a chessboard of reactions, some faces eager, others skeptical. Keanu sat opposite Melissa, hands calmly folded in his lap. Melissa gave her perfect, camera-ready smile. "Keanu Reeves, welcome to the show." The red light blinked on. The game had begun. Melissa's tone was soft, disarming, like a velvet knife. "Let's start with something simple," she cooed. "What do you think about the future of Hollywood?" Keanu gave that gentle, almost cryptic smile. The one people had come to love. What no one realized, not Melissa, not her producers, not even the audience, was that Keanu had walked into this room fully aware, and in less than 5 minutes he would flip everything on its head. The studio was lit like a dream. Keanu looked like a man carved from classic cinema, timeless, grounded, a presence you couldn't replicate. Melissa studied him with the eyes of a predator dressed like a friend. "Keanu," she said sweetly, "it's truly an honor. You've had one of the most fascinating careers in Hollywood. Action hero, drama icon, romantic lead. Somehow people just adore you." Keanu tilted his head, ever humble. "I've been lucky." Melissa chuckled. "Maybe, but let's be honest. You represent something very specific in Hollywood." She leaned in, voice feather light. "A certain masculinity." Keanu didn't flinch. She continued, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Hollywood is shifting. The strong, silent action hero, it's outdated. Don't you think?" A pause. "Do actors like you still have a place in cinema?" The air in the room changed. Keanu leaned back, paused, then smiled. "Well," he said gently, "stories change, but values don't." Melissa's smile flickered. "Values, courage, loyalty, protecting the people you love. Those things don't expire. How we tell those stories might evolve, but why we tell them, that's eternal." A few audience members shifted. Melissa clocked it. She needed to push harder. She threw the cue cards aside. "No more subtlety, Keanu," she said, her tone sharpening. "You've played Neo, John Wick. Characters defined by dominance and violence. Don't you think that promotes a toxic version of masculinity? One that glorifies revenge and rejects vulnerability?" The studio fell silent. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. The producers leaned forward, sensing the moment. If Keanu cracked, just a twitch of anger, they had their headline. But Keanu didn't flinch, he smiled. He looked at Melissa, then at the audience, and with a calm, grounded tone, he prepared to answer. And that is where everything began to shift. Keanu leaned forward just slightly, his voice quiet but deliberate. "Well, that's an interesting way to look at it." The room tensed. Melissa Carter tilted her head, feigning curiosity. but her body language betrayed her anticipation. She was waiting for him to stumble, for even a flicker of hesitation or defensiveness. Anything she could spin. But Keanu gave her nothing. No stumble. No crack in the armor, only a calm smile. Subtle. Controlled. And then, he repeated it, softer this time, like it was almost a private thought. That's an interesting way to look at it. Melissa raised a brow, waiting for him to expand. So did the producers behind the glass, their fingers hovering over the cut feed. The audience leaned forward, the trap had been set. But Keanu didn't fall. Instead, he turned. I don't think telling stories about courage, sacrifice, and protecting the people you love is toxic. Do you? Melissa's lips parted, but she didn't answer right away. Her practiced smile wavered just slightly. The room shifted. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't angry. He was holding up a mirror. And now Melissa had to respond. She let out a small laugh, trying to recover her poise. Of course not, she said, smoothing her tone. But the way those values are portrayed, let's be honest, Keanu. A lot of your films revolve around violence. Don't you think that has an impact? Keanu nodded thoughtfully, as if considering it for the first time. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. Do you believe stories should stop showing conflict? Melissa blinked. The question caught her off guard. Keanu didn't stop. Because if we remove every story that includes struggle, redemption, and yes, even violence, then what are we left with? The audience stirred, a few exchanged glances. Melissa remained silent too long. Keanu smiled again, this time, with something behind it, something sharper. Then what are you saying? The control room panicked. Melissa's team scrambled behind the scenes. This wasn't going as planned, not even close. He wasn't unraveling. He was tightening the thread around their entire narrative. Melissa shifted in her seat, fighting to regain ground. Keanu, you've always been admired for your kindness, your humility, and yet, so many of your roles portray men who solve problems with their fists. Isn't that a contradiction? Keanu tilted his head slightly, almost confused by the question. Why would it be? Melissa blinked again. He continued. Are you saying people who practice kindness aren't capable of defending others? A low murmur swept across the studio. Boom. That one hit. Melissa hesitated. The producers looked at each other, wide-eyed. This wasn't how the segment was supposed to unfold. Keanu turned slightly to address the audience directly. His voice calm but unwavering. I was raised to believe that kindness and strength aren't opposites. That standing up for what's right doesn't make you aggressive, it means you care. A pause. The air shifted. The audience wasn't just listening, they were believing. Melissa knew it. So did Keanu, and in that moment, the power in the room changed hands. Melissa's producers whispered frantically behind the camera, cueing cards, debating whether to cut to commercial. But it was too late. Keanu had taken control of the tone, of the room, and he wasn't done. The silence returned, thick like fog. Melissa watched him closely, waiting. Keanu leaned back in his chair, arms relaxed, still unshaken. That's an interesting way to look at it, he said again, echoing himself. Melissa's eyes narrowed. How so? Keanu's voice was gentle, but it had a gravity to it. Every word, anchored. If protecting the people we love. If standing up for what's right, if fighting against injustice makes someone toxic. He gave a soft shrug. Then I'm happy to be toxic. The audience murmured. Some nodded. Others exchanged nervous glances. Melissa tried to laugh, but it rang hollow now. That's a poetic answer, Keanu, but let's talk facts. She flipped through her cue cards, now a little too fast. Your films, John Wick, The Matrix, Speed, all center around violence. A man who solves problems with his fists, with guns. Doesn't that send the wrong message? Keanu tilted his head slightly, thoughtful. Then, I think stories are more than what happens on the surface. Melissa frowned. Keanu leaned in. I think what matters isn't what my characters do, but why they do it. He exhaled slowly, as if choosing his next words carefully. I was raised by a single mother. The audience fell silent. Even Melissa blinked, caught off guard. Keanu continued, his voice softer now, more personal. I watched her work harder than anyone I knew. I watched her struggle, sacrifice, protect me. And she taught me something. He paused. That strength isn't about power, it's about responsibility. It's about standing up for people who can't always stand up for themselves. Melissa opened her mouth to respond, but he wasn't finished. And the men who taught me martial arts, they taught me the same thing. That real strength isn't about hurting people. He looked her straight in the eye. It's about knowing when not to. A stillness settled over the room. Melissa let out another forced laugh. But it was thinner this time, fragile. Keanu was dismantling everything she had built for this segment, piece by piece. She cleared her throat, searching for a foothold. That's a beautiful sentiment, Keanu, she said. But at the end of the day, your movies are about violence, about revenge. Don't you think Hollywood should be moving away from that? Keanu paused, then replied gently. I think Hollywood should move toward truth. Melissa blinked. Keanu gestured subtly toward the audience. People don't watch John Wick because they want to see violence, he said, voice calm but weighted. They watch it because they understand loss. They understand grief. He looked at her again, and they understand what it means to lose something and still keep going. The studio was still echoing from Keanu's last words. The audience sat quietly, the weight of the moment pin dropped palpable. Then he said it. The desire to protect what matters, that's not toxic. That's human. The shift was instant. You could feel it, in the murmurs, in the subtle glances exchanged across the crowd. Melissa Carter could feel it too. Her carefully maintained composure faltered. Her heart pounded. The producers behind the cameras were already waving their hands, signaling change direction. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned in with a tight smile and said something she'd regret for a long time. Keanu, do you really believe that? Or is this just another Hollywood script? The room froze. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a slow-moving wave. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just smiled. A knowing, quiet smile that didn't need to shout to be heard. A Hollywood script. He repeated, tapping his fingers softly on his knee. No. I don't think truth needs a script. Melissa's smile twitched, struggling to hold. Keanu leaned forward just slightly, voice low but razor sharp. Sometimes people confuse conversation with confrontation. I came here thinking we were having a conversation. Beat. But it feels like you came here looking for something else. You could feel the air being sucked out of the room. A few audience members gasped. Some looked at Melissa. Some couldn't look at her at all. She laughed, too fast, too thin. Scrambling, she flipped through her cue cards and changed tactics, hoping to take back control. Keanu, you've had an amazing career, she said sweetly, almost too sweet. But don't you think it's time for new voices, new stories, maybe even new faces? It wasn't a question, it was a trigger. The audience caught it instantly, a challenge masked in politeness. Keanu didn't take the bait. He looked her dead in the eyes. When I was a kid, I was taught that respect for those who came before us was essential. He paused, then added, it's interesting how today, respect seems optional. A silence. Not a breath, not a shuffle. Even the producers stopped whispering. Melissa's face stiffened. She laughed again, forced, hollow. But it was too late. The power in the room had shifted. The crowd was no longer watching an interview. They were witnessing a collapse. Phones were already out. Screens glowed. The clip was going viral before the commercial break had even started. INT. Countiral row muse. Cut to break. Someone shouted. Too late. Another producer barked, eyes wide on the live feed. People are already posting it. And they were. Hashtags exploded. Fair respect is optional. Vecna dead and flinch faith. Melissa Carter exposed. The internet was ablaze. Influencers dissected the moment. News outlets reposted it within minutes. It was trending on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere. Back in the studio, Melissa's assistant whispered urgently, Melissa, the clip is everywhere. She clenched her jaw, sipped water with a brittle smile, trying to look unfazed. This was supposed to be her moment. Instead, it had become his legacy. But not like this. Not with her looking weak. Melissa Carter had planned to trend, but not as the punchline. She needed to recover fast. As the show returned from commercial, cameras rolled and lights burned hotter than ever. Melissa inhaled sharply, forced a light laugh, and tried to reset the mood. Well, Keanu, that was certainly a spirited discussion, she said, voice sugar-coated. Keanu just smiled, calm, grounded, silent. Melissa turned back to the camera, reaching for control. Folks, we'll continue this conversation online. Don't forget to subscribe and... But it was too late. The world wasn't listening to Melissa Carter anymore. They were listening to Keanu Reeves, and the most powerful part, he didn't need to say another word. By nightfall, the interview wasn't just trending, it had consumed the news cycle. Mainstream media replayed the moment frame by frame, analysts debated, commentators took sides. Some claimed Melissa was simply asking hard questions. But others, millions, saw it clearly. She tried to bait him. And Keanu, being Keanu, turned it into a quiet masterclass in grace. There's a reason people love this man. He doesn't play media games. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Melissa Carter underestimated him. She believed she could corner him. She forgot exactly who she was dealing with. And now she had to watch her own reputation unravel in real time. The next morning, as Melissa entered her office, her assistant was waiting, phone in hand, face pale. Melissa, we have a problem. Melissa exhaled hard, rubbing her temples. What now? The assistant flipped her phone around. A new video had surfaced. Keanu Reeves leaving a quiet cafe. A reporter approached. Keanu, do you have anything to say about the Melissa Carter interview? Keanu smiled, then said, in the calmest voice imaginable, gentleness never goes out of style. 6 words, that was all, and it was over. Melissa stared at the screen. The clip had already hit 5 million views in under 24 hours. 6 words had become a cultural lightning bolt. For gentleness wins fake and you didn't flinch at respectus and optional memes exploded across the internet. GIFs of Keanu's calm smile during the interview sat beside clips of him uttering the now legendary phrase. On TikTok, a viral trend took hold, people reenacting tense situations and responding with, "Gentleness never goes out of style." It wasn't just viral, it was a cultural moment. And Keanu, he wasn't even online. Hollywood watched, actors and directors took sides, but the public had already chosen. Keanu didn't just win the interview, he won the conversation. Melissa tried to fight back. She uploaded a response. "I have nothing but respect for Keanu Reeves, but let's be honest, his fans took this out of context. I was just doing my job." She paused, then delivered her counterpunch. If people can't handle a little healthy debate, maybe the real issue isn't masculinity, maybe it's fragility. Boom. She waited. At first some supporters clapped back online. "She's right." Keanu didn't even answer her question. Why is he treated like a saint? But then the tide turned. Fast. She lost and blamed him for being too nice. She tried to spin gentleness into weakness. This backfired hard. And it did. The next morning 3 sponsors pulled out. The network called for an emergency meeting. Then it arrived. An email with a subject line she couldn't ignore. Urgent. Meeting regarding the future of the Melissa Carter show. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just a PR nightmare. This was career-ending territory, and she was out of moves. Meanwhile, Keanu remained silent. No statements, no interviews, no drama. He simply carried on with his life. That made it even worse, because every time someone tried to drag him back into the storm, the response was simple: gentleness never goes out of style. The internet had already crowned a winner, and Melissa, she was just prolonging her own downfall. Later that week, a reporter spotted Keanu outside a bookstore. "Keanu, any final thoughts on the Melissa Carter interview?" Holding a paper coffee cup, he paused, smiled, and said, "I think we should all try listening more than we speak." That was it. Another quiet sentence. And it broke the internet again. Melissa Carter had built an empire by putting stars on the spot. She thought Keanu would be easy. She was wrong. She tried to shame him. He answered with calm. She tried to corner him. He dismantled her attack, without ever raising his voice. When I was a kid, I was taught that respect for those who came before us was essential. It's interesting how today respect seems optional. That was the turning point. The audience felt it. She lost the room. The clip spread like wildfire. Then came the second viral video. Then the memes. Then the sponsors vanished. Melissa tried damage control. She released a half apology. "I regret if my words were misinterpreted." But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Her show was quietly phased out. Viewership collapsed. And Keanu, he moved on, because some battles are not won by fighting. Some wars are won in silence. Melissa Carter tried to bury Keanu Reeves. Instead, she buried herself. And Keanu, without even trying, taught the world the greatest lesson of all: true power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real.